The Thing. It's the end of the 2021, the eve of Russia's major holiday, the New Year's Day. Outside, the cold wind is moaning ominously, and the relentless blizzard is raging. I'm sitting next to the stove and watching the blurred lights of the street lamps on the other side of the frost-covered window pane. And there's a feeling of immeasurable peace, the blizzard outside, snow drifts and wind moaning like ghosts from English legends. And I'm sitting in the quiet little kitchen and listening to the logs crackling in the stove. In the next room, young people are having fun, sitting around a big table, drinking champagne and waiting for the president's speech. I hear their laughter and happy voices. They haven't even noticed my leaving the room. That's okay. I'm not offended. Let the young people have fun while they are strong and healthy. I want to be alone with my memories. It's a good time to do that. There's something fabulous and mysterious about this wind and snowstorm. But what is it? I can't figure out. There were a lot of stories in my life. The happy ones, funny and sad. The tragic ones. When you get 81, you do have something to remember. And so you have something to tell your 12-year-old grandchildren. But there's only one story I want to tell you right now. At this night time, outside, the trees are crackling in the gust of the wind, and everything is buried under the thick snowy mounds. It's been a long time since I remembered that part of my biography. But now, apparently, I will have to. This story took place on that same cold December evening in 1969. My family and I had already moved to the small town of Ussurisk, where we have lived to this day. A town which is always bright green in the summer and white with snow in the winter. My wife, my daughter and I were happy with everything. I've never had a car. I haven't earned it. Although I think the problem is elsewhere. I've never wanted it. It would have been more trouble than it was worth. So my only steel horse was a well-preserved Voskhod motorcycle. It still stands in our garage, but my grandson took it apart almost completely. That evening I was returning home from the village of Utosnaya. It's connected to Ussurisk with a straight highway, 3 kilometers long. No problem should have arisen. Just keep going straight until you see the first street lights of the city in the distance. If you're wondering what I did in Utosnaya, don't fill your head with nonsense. This story will drive you to boredom. Some ordinary business of an ordinary man. Now I often think this might not have happened if I had waited until morning and only then left the village. I left at 8:45. I successfully crossed the bridge built over the Razdolnaya river. It starts right after Utosnaya and continued on the road. No cars passed along the way. Only the headlight of my Voskhod illuminated the impenetrable darkness. The ditches were covered with a 2-meter layer of snow, and the trees behind them were clad in snow-white robes. The snow fell in a thin veil, and then in dense swirling streams, beating and stabbing my face. And I was alone. All alone. Despite all the beauty surrounding me, everything looked hostile. Even the trees growing on both sides of the highway seemed to stretch their thin branches towards me. The roar of the engine could not compete with the howling of the wind carrying prickly snowflakes. All I could dream about was getting home as quickly as possible, to feel warm and cozy. It was better not to go out at all in that weather. What the hell had I done? What if the bike fails? What then? Walking isn't an option at all. You could freeze to death in a snowstorm like that and leave your wife and daughter on their own. What a fool I was. My hands were starting to get numb, despite the woolen gauntlets. The same thing happened to my nose and cheeks. And then I saw a man about 10 meters away from me. He seemed to have come out of nowhere. A figure appeared in the headlights, against the background of the night darkness and snowfall, like in those movies my grandchildren watch. In a panic, I swerved to the left, nearly flipping over and hitting the stranger. The man was in his 40s. He was wearing a brown jacket, fur boots, and a hat with ear flaps. He was howling pitifully. His knees were shaking. I looked at his face. It felt as if he had been in a terrible accident. His whole face and neck were covered in dripping blood. His eyelids were twitching. He was looking at me with crazy eyes. Steam was coming out of his mouth. My panic was growing. I wanted to get back on the bike and get as far away from there as possible. I could feel nothing good would come of meeting this guy, and it didn't. But I couldn't leave him there all alone, could I? I touched his shoulder. I gave him a little yank. He was clearly out of it. "Sir," I said, "can I help you?" "Yes, yes," he shrieked as if he had just woken up. "Help me, please. I beg you. Take me away from here." He put his head on my shoulder and began to cry. "What happened to you?" "Okay, forget it. Get behind me." I had to scream to yell over the howling wind. "Yes, yes, thank you." He raised his head and pointed to the side of the road, and I could see the trail of his boots through the drifts in the ditch and out past the trees. "There's something there, in that place, what I found in the woods. I shot at it, but I couldn't kill it. It's not human, but I couldn't kill it." The man started giggling, then laughed, and towards the end, he screamed. I didn't try to calm him down. At the moment I started the bike and grabbed the wheel, a long, terrified scream came from the woods. It must have been the sound of a woman being stabbed alive. There was a lump in my throat. Only then did I realize that I was there all alone. The stranger was insane. He was not to be relied upon. And if anything happened to me, who would help me? When would they find me? There was another heartbreaking scream from the forest, rising and falling, merging with the howl of the wind. Then the scream fell down to a bass sound, and after that there came an explosion of rabid laughter. And then there was silence. Only the wind was chilling my skin and heart. Struggling with terror, I started the bike, and we rode off. The stranger clung to my neck, almost choking me. He kept muttering the same thing. "I chopped it to pieces, and it still wouldn't die." The head was talking and laughing. Talking and laughing. Oh God! When the lights of the houses appeared ahead, I calmed down a little. I dropped the man off at the intersection of Lenin and Agave streets, and never saw him again. When I finally got home and saw my family, I came to my senses completely, feeling relieved everything was over. In the morning, a young girl was found murdered near the village of Borisovka, very close to the river. The killer fired several rounds into her and stuck her in a frozen drain pipe after dismembering the body. The police were horrified. The perpetrator had stacked her up in pieces like a stack of firewood. The head was found 100 yards from the pipe, in the bushes. The hair was stained with blood, and the handle of a sickle protruded from the forehead. The murderer had most likely used it to cut the corpse into pieces. There was a triumphant smile on the girl's face. She had no documents on her, and in the meantime, the residents of Borisovka and the nearby blocks of Ussurisk are being questioned. That morning, after reading the newspaper, I shuddered. could I have possibly given the killer a ride that night? Why possibly, though? That's the way it was. The goddamn schizophrenic had gone completely insane and killed his wife or his daughter or his mistress or just some girl walking by. I should have called the station and reported it. But what stopped me? Fear or his words? I chopped it to pieces and it still wouldn't die. The head was talking and laughing, talking and laughing. Oh God. Or maybe it was all just a game of his sick imagination. Anyway, I didn't believe it. And for good reason. 2 days later, when the corpse, its parts, was taken to the morgue and reconstructed, folded, sewed up, I don't know how they do it, the body disappeared from its place. That very night, without a trace. From the morgue. The doctor on duty that night said that before he noticed the corpse disappeared, he heard some slow, slapping sounds of footsteps at the end of the corridor. Now I'm not sure the man was insane. And if he was crazy, it was only because of what he had seen that snowy night. I shot at it, but I couldn't kill it. It's not human, but I couldn't kill it. And another thing. How had he managed to get from Borisovka all the way to Utosny on that freezing evening? How? And why? Anyway, it doesn't matter anymore. I still think about what if one moonless night, my old companion will hear a knock or a bell at the door. And when he comes up and asks, "Who's there?" he will only hear silence and wind. He'll open the door and see what? A bloody sickle clutched in a hand as white as wax, a triumphant smile on the dead face, or something worse. What if it comes for me too? Nonsense, of course, after all these years. But still, I gave him a ride, and witnesses, as they say in the movies, are removed. I'm not getting at anything, of course, but